Good evening. My name is Dana Morgenroth. I'm the president of the Pittsburgh Free Thought community, and I know you're all excited. We have Dan Barker tonight. How about a small hand for Dan already? The reason we're excited to have Dan here tonight is that Dan, together with Annie Laurie and everyone at FFRF, does some really important work, mostly on the national, international levels, although of course that involves local projects as well. But aside from the national work and all the neat work that's being done there by Dan and the FFRF, there's some neat work that's going on here in Pittsburgh. And so before I turn over to Dan, take just a minute and tell you about some of the work that's going on here with the Pittsburgh Free Thought community, and more importantly, some of the important people that are making that work happen. So I've put up our website. I hope you'll visit it. And it happens to show some of the events and activities that the Pittsburgh Free Thought community puts on every month. We have monthly lecture nights such as tonight. We have topic-focused discussion groups. We have experts come in from around the country and around the world to teach us about science and reason and freedom from religion and critical thinking. We have a book club. I want to point out a very important person. Where's Bill Hellwig? Bill Hellwig is our vice president of Martinis. He's in charge of some of our social events. A very important person with our group, so keep your eye on Bill. If you're a PFC board member, would you please raise your hand? Thank you. These are people that give their time, talent, and treasure to try to make things happen at a local level. I want to recognize a couple people very quickly. Victor Bernard is our outgoing corporate secretary. He's spent years and years putting up with us on our board of directors. His day job is documenting the decommissionment of nuclear submarines, which he says is easier than trying to record what we're all thinking. Our new secretary is Marie Schaub in the corner. Welcome, Marie. We all wish you good luck.
Thank you, Marie.
We've got a number of new members this month in the audience. I see Rebecca and Jonathan and several others. We thank you for your support. One of the ways you can support this important local work is by participating in our community. Please visit our website, come out to our events, get to know us, be a part of our community. Please consider becoming a member of PFC. Our basic membership starts at $20 entire a year, so that you can support the work we do. Meeting rooms aren't free. Airfares to bring in speakers aren't free. So we have a lot of people that support us locally. I thank you very, very much. I want to introduce a friend of mine, Dr. Stephen Hurdle. Steve is the chair of the executive board of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And it's my honor to turn things over to Stephen to introduce Dan.
Well, it's great to see everyone here, the room full. We are here to welcome Dan Barker. For those of you who don't know, I think most of you probably do know, he is one of the co-presidents, along with his spouse, Annie Laurie Gaylor, of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. FFRF, with over 30,000 members, is the largest free thought organization in the U.S. And it works well because it has two very simple goals. One is to act as a watchdog for state-church separation, and the other is to provide a voice for atheists, agnostics, skeptics, and other non-theists. He did bring books which will be for sale, and also copies of their magazine, Free Thought Today. If you don't get that, this is free. You can pick this one up, and these little non-tracks, as they call them, to hand out when somebody rings your doorbell and asks you to join their church. You can give them a track back. So take a look at those as well. FFRF, if you haven't been, it's really worth going to their very informative website. I think it's one of the more valuable things they do. You can read about numerous state church issues, things like, is it legal to vote in churches? Unfortunately, the answer is yes, and there's nothing that FFRF or anyone else can do about it, although there are restrictions. So if they're violating those restrictions, you can have a chance to complain about it. Maybe the Ten Commandments is in front of your school. Marie realized that and went to FFRF, and with their help, they were able to remove the Ten Commandments sitting in front of Valley High School near New Kensington, the local event. But tonight we're here to listen to Dan, who is an accomplished musician. If there is room for him to get to the piano, I would send him over there, but it's a little tight in here. And an author of now 10 books, including A Life-Driven Purpose, How an Atheist Finds Meaning, and also Just Pretend. I had that out there, a free thought book for children. Tonight he's going to be discussing his latest book, Mere Morality, for which he will have copies for sale and signing at the end of the talk. So please welcome my good friend, Dan Barker.
Well, thank you, Stephen. He came and picked me up at the airport today and gave me a tour of all the best spots of downtown Pittsburgh. And I guess since you're the chair of our executive board, you're kind of my boss, aren't you? You're kind of. So I better do a good job tonight. And Stephen has been very helpful for many years with our board meetings. And you know how exciting board meetings can be. Actually, with our organization, it is kind of exciting. The things that we get to do, the decisions we get to make, the projects we carry out. We just decided we are going to hire for the first time, even though we've been doing some lobbying over the years, piecemeal, we're going to hire a full-time lobbyist in D.C. So we finally made that big jump. And we're interviewing now, so if any of you want to apply. And it's nice to see Craig Thompson here. He's been a long-time member since when? 78. Since 78. Or 87. Same thing, right? Long enough ago that and good to see you were up at the, what is it called, the North Unitarian? Yeah. Yeah, up there. So I was up there a few times. So it's nice to see you again. And Marie's back there. Where's Marie hiding? Marie is a hero. You all know about her story. You all know about her case? If you don't, you should know about her case. She single-handedly took on the Ten Commandments and won. Annie Laurie, my wife, says there's nothing more fun than suing the government. And I would add, there's nothing more fun than suing the government and winning, because and since Trump was inaugurated, we have had 16 legal victories in the courts and 3 losses. So that's not a bad batting average. 16 cases, either from a decision or from a positive settlement in the courts. We have 9 full-time attorneys who are working really hard. Plus we have interns. There's going to be 5 legal interns this summer. And they work really hard with the intake and with mainly writing letters. And they can't get the work done. There's so much to do all over the country. So maybe some of you have sent in complaints in this area or other parts of the country. And they have a real good system down for handling these things. Most of their work is non-litigation. When we tell them when we hire them, we want to try to solve these things without going to court, because going to court is time-consuming and expensive. So we solve them by writing letters. And last year alone, I forget, was it 3,000 or 4,000 complaints came in, and more than 1,000 letters we sent out to mayors and governors and school superintendents and principals and postmasters, you name it. And from those, more than 1,000 letters we sent out, more than 300 of those came back as victories. In other words, they stopped doing what they were doing that was wrong, which was illegal, which is amazing. Any one of those 300 victories could have been a lawsuit. It could have been expensive, but we were able to write the letter, zero in on the legal precedent for that part of the country. Here's what the law says. Here's why it's wrong. And once in a while, they even thank us. Once in a while, a superintendent will say, we didn't know this was wrong. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Usually they change it reluctantly. Usually they say, yeah, I guess we don't want to get sued, so we're going to change this, which is okay. And in some cases, they save face by telling the community, hey, I wanted to fight for this Jesus painting hanging in the high school, but we don't have the money to go to court, so they're going to take it down. That's fine with us. It lets them show their constituents that they still love Jesus, but they have to follow the law. There was a superintendent in south of Memphis. They're in northern Mississippi. They were having prayers over the loudspeakers at football games, high school football games. So we sent the letter saying, by the way, you can't do this. This is illegal. And sometimes they say, oh yeah, well, we're going to fight this to the Supreme Court. And we have to remind them, this has already been taken to the Supreme Court. This has already been decided. We're just reminding you of the law. So, so the superintendent said, you know, I guess we should probably stop doing this. So he sent a letter to all the principals saying, we can't have these prayers over the loudspeakers anymore. And boy, did that cause a ruckus. You know, what is this outside Wisconsin group coming down telling us how to run our local? Well, it's not us. It's local people complaining, and it's the Supreme Court. So it's not like we're some outside group coming in. And on the evening news, the superintendent was quoted saying, you know, we've been doing this for a long time, and I kind of thought there was something wrong with this, but we thought we'd keep doing it till someone told us to stop. So what kind of message is that to the students? You know what I mean? What kind of example is that to them? You know, just if it's illegal, well, just keep speeding until you see the highway patrol, you know, then. And so our group is the highway patrol. Because where is the enforcement for the Constitution? Where are the officers going around? Where is that? If somebody's breaking the law, if some fifth grade teacher is leading the kids in prayer, who stops that? Usually a parent might complain, but legally, what teeth are there? So it's watchdog groups like ours that do these things. And we also have the second purpose of educating the public about the views of non-believers. So we like the word free thinker and free thought. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's a single word that goes way back. The first known use was back in like 1711 in a book, Free Thinkers. And it just means basically people who make their decisions about religion based on reason alone. So a free thinker is really a rationalist. And most of our members call themselves atheists, happy atheists. A lot of them prefer the word agnostic. We don't care. Some of them like other words, secular humanist or deist or Buddhist or whatever. What we say is we don't care what we call ourselves. We all disbelieve in the same God, so you know, what does it matter? So for the educational, we have books and newspaper. We have a national radio show, Free Thought Radio. We have a TV show called Free Thought Matters. We just interviewed Daniel Dennett. Somebody needs to come in, is that what you're saying?
Light switch.
Oh, light switch. Is that better?
Hey. This one's good. Okay, good work.
Up by sign language.
There we go. So a couple weeks ago, we interviewed philosopher Daniel Dennett, and we're in about 9 major markets now on television. Are we in Pittsburgh?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. We can work on that maybe. And have some of you seen our ad with Ron Reagan on some of the, like on MSNBC, where he says, Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell. And that ad was censored by CBS and a bunch of CBS National, although we got it run on some local CBS stations. And now we have a new ad with Steven Pinker, which is going to be airing pretty soon. So we try to educate, we try to change public opinion, let the world know that the fastest growing religion right now in the United States is non-religion. Whatever that means, it's the fastest growing, and religion is shrinking. And I think our country, in one sense, is kind of growing up. Although the religious minority, which is getting smaller and smaller, they are getting madder and madder. They hate losing. They've been losing every single fight. They've been losing. It used to be women's right to vote. Then it was birth control, and then it was prayer in the schools, and then gay marriage, and you name it, abortion, you name it. These issues they keep fighting and losing, and they hate it. And I think they're kind of like this wounded animal in the forest that knows it's dying and hates it. It wants to take everything down that it can. So it's a very dangerous time we're living in. Even though the numbers are shrinking, their power seems to be unwarranted. So we have a lot of fighting to do. So part of our educational efforts is speakers. And a number of our staff go out and speak and do events. Andrew Seidel, one of our attorneys, has a new book that's coming out next month called The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. Not only are we not a Christian nation, it's a good thing we're not. It's a wonderful book that's coming out. So maybe he'll come and talk here in a few months. and others of our attorneys, and Annie, Lori, and I, we travel. So for me, this is the 25th event this year for me in about a dozen states, and as far west as Alaska, as far east as Poland. We were in Warsaw a couple weeks ago, Poland, for the atheist event there. Poland has a great atheist community. We marched down the streets of Warsaw with balloons and more than about 200 atheists marching to reenact the execution of 330 years ago, Kazimierz Wyszynski, who was an atheist who was publicly executed for writing a book challenging the existence of God. So all over the world, Latin America is really coming strong. I can think of about 8 or 10 countries where they've got strong humanist free thought groups finally coming out. Peru and Guatemala especially. And Honduras has in 2 big cities. Puerto Rico, I'm going to Puerto Rico in a few months. So free thought is kind of in flower. It's kind of like coming back, and we've got a mission to do. We've got something to accomplish. So, and then on Thursday night will be the final. In the last 3 months, it'll be the 26th event. I'm doing a debate. My 5th debate of this year, a debate up in Wausau, Wisconsin. Is the God of the Bible exists? Something like that is the title. And I'm going to mention the fact that in Wausau 11 years ago, an 11-year-old girl died because her parents believed the Bible. The Bible said that prayer of faith will heal the sick, so they didn't take her to the hospital, and she died up there. So I'm going to mention that horrible story during Thursday night's debate. He's a local minister. So I love doing these things. I love debates. It'll be my 136th public formal debate since 1985. And I just love doing these things with a moderator and the clock's ticking, and most of the time the opponent isn't used to doing debates, so they kind of run out of time. And so debates are a different kind of animal. You either love it or you don't, and I do. And then you're thinking on your feet in front of a live audience, and the clock's ticking, and you got to say, you know. So I think that's a lot of fun. But tonight I want to talk about my newest book. It's called Mere Morality. I tell my story of being a preacher. I was a preacher for 19 years, and I tell that story in my book, Godless, how an evangelical preacher became one of America's leading atheists. And in the foreword to the book, Richard Dawkins, the scientist, he wrote, Dan Barker wasn't just a preacher. He was the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. And I was that guy. I was just that, you know what I mean, that guy. Have you met that guy in the world? Really confident, and I had the Bible and the love of Jesus and all that. But I changed my mind. And if you're interested in that story, you can read it. I think we have some copies here. And then I have some other books, Life-Driven Purpose, which answers Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life book. And so, and then a kind of a pet interest of mine is free will. So I have a book last year called Free Will Explained. In the foreword, Michael Shermer, the scientist, said, Dan Barker has not answered the problem of free will. He's not solved the problem of free will. He has eliminated the problem of free will, which is a totally different thing. So if you're into that kind of philosophy and stuff, look at the book Free Will Explained, in which I tell a story about a little pet chipmunk I have in the backyard that I call Little One, and I'm waiting this year to see if he's coming back. They only live 6 or 8 years, and this will be like the 6th, 2014, so whatever that is, I'm hoping he'll come back again. 5? Yep. So he might have been a year old when I first met him, so who knows. So anyway, and so that whole story, and he's famous because I was out in the backyard in the summer writing on the laptop, and the other chipmunks don't do this, but Little One, I call him, just out of nowhere, he'll just hop right on my knee and start getting the nuts, and he'll just come right up, and we're really good little friends. And then one day he stepped on the keyboard of my laptop, and he hit the hyphen key, so I left it in the book. So there's a chipmunk who is a contributing author to a book that I wrote, which is pretty fun. It's a mammal, right? And it made a decision to not to type a word, but to step where he stepped. So there you go. But mere morality is basically, can you be good without God? Or even someone asked, can you be good with God? That's a whole different question. We have grandchildren in Wisconsin. And this past weekend, Keelani and Ivy were at our house for 2 days. And it was a lot of fun. You forget when you're a parent, you forget when you have kids around the house again, how you have to keep your radar up all the time, because they're always just everywhere. And Sunday morning, Easter Sunday morning for breakfast, I was asking Ivy, who's 6 years old, so Ivy, there's bad people in the world, and she said, yeah, and there's good people in the world, and she said, yeah. And I said, why is that? And she thought for a minute, and she said, that's how the world goes, she said. That's her answer. That's how the world, there are some good people, there are some bad people. And why is that? Why are there some people that you just naturally know are just good people? And why are there others that are naturally not? I don't want to name any names, but you can probably think of some names of people. And then maybe some who fall somewhere in the middle, kind of. You know, what is that? What does it mean actually to be good and to be a good person or a bad person? After I left the ministry, for about 9 months, you know, I was looking for a job, and I was starting to read books. I love reading just any books I can, especially, I didn't realize there was all this free thought literature. I discovered Robert Ingersoll and then Bertrand Russell and some of the others, and I found a little book in a catalog by a woman named Annie Laurie Gaylor called Woe to the Women, the Bible Tells Me So. So I wrote her a letter. I said, I love your book, by the way, I'm a former preacher. And so she didn't answer, but her mom answered, and that's how I got connected with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we met in 1984, a few months after I was a preacher. We met because a TV show in Chicago invited them and me to talk about atheism. They said, here's a guy, he used to be a preacher, and now he's an atheist. So they flew me to Chicago, and the host of the show was a young woman named Oprah Winfrey. And you can see that. Somebody videotaped it and sent us the tape, so we have it on, I put it on YouTube. You can look it up. That's AM Chicago. You can look up Barker, Winfrey, or whatever. And that was the very first time I had ever publicly spoken about my atheism to anybody. That was the first time that I'd ever spoken before a hostile audience, because Oprah had packed that audience with Bible thumpers. It was really good TV. It was excellent TV. And a few years ago, we showed our daughter, Sabrina, the day her parents met, because that's the day that I first knowingly met and talked with any other atheist. I thought I might have been the only one. So it's kind of cool that we have a recording of that day. I loved it. The fact that the audience was hostile, I thought, this is great. Because when you're a preacher all these years, everybody's just, amen, God, you know. And never once in all my years of preaching did anyone ever come up and say, Reverend Barker, that was a great sermon, but what were your sources for that? What were your references? How do you substantiate? No one ever did that. Why? People are coming to church because they love what you're doing. So here on this show, here was this audience that was hating us, and one woman even called Annie Laurie a witch. You know, it was pretty good TV. So we met that day. 3 years later, Annie Laurie and I got married. So we have a video of the day we met, which is kind of fun. And so we planned, she's a third generation free thinker, and we planned this ceremony in a free thought hall. It wasn't a church, with a judge. Moria Krieger was her name. In fact, she kind of owed her judgeship to Annie Laurie, who led the protest, the first successful grassroots recall of a judge in the United States, Judge Archie Simonson, who basically said, these boys in high school who gang raped this girl under the stairwell, well, boys will be boys, you know. And she was dressed, I mean, look how she was wearing a turtleneck sweater. It was wintertime. And so, I mean, every time he was on the media, he made things worse and worse. And so it outraged not just the feminists, but anybody. And so Annie Laurie led this recall. The judge got recalled, Judge Archie Simonson. And what's her name? Malvina Reynolds even wrote a song about it called something Recall the Judge. And so then to replace the judge, it was Moria Krieger. So she was the person who officiated our wedding, which is really cool. She had her black robe and her purple shoes showing underneath it. And so we had all this whole thing planned out. Feminist, atheist, free thought, music by George Gershwin, by the way, who was a non-believer. And so we went down to the courthouse to get our license. And the county clerk, you know, was doing all the stuff. And then finally the clerk said, so, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And we said, oh, and Annie Laurie said, we can't swear to God, we're atheists. We would like to take the affirmation. Because we know in Wisconsin you have this option to take an affirmation rather than swear. And so the clerk said, oh, no one's ever asked me that before. Let's see. So then she said, okay, do you affirm to tell the truth, so help you God? So we had to object again. So we said, we know it's in the statute. So she looked it up and she found the statute, which is a big, long thing about affirming that the testimony you're about to give is the truth to the best of your knowledge, and so on and so on and so on, under the pains and penalty of perjury. Right? Then we said, finally, yes, we can say yes to that. Good. But isn't it interesting? If you believe in God, all you have to say is, so help me God. But if you don't believe in God, you have to be reminded of the pains and penalty of perjury. It's wrong to tell a lie in court. You have to be reminded. And if you believe in God, well, the fear of hell should be enough, right? That makes you a good person. The fear of hell makes you moral. But if you don't have that, then what do you have? You have to be reminded the law is really going to come down on you if you don't. We think it should be the other way around. We think the secular affirmation should be the first one given, and if you want to ask for a religious one, then you could. Some people do want to. There are some people who want to affirm for religious reasons. They don't want to swear. But the question of, is believing in God the way to be moral? Do you scare people? The Bible says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the whole biblical system, which I write about in my book from 2 years ago, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, it really is a system of intimidation. And even if you think about it, what is hell? Hell is a threat of violence, right? And I kind of think any ideology that has to make its point by threatening violence is a morally bankrupt system. Is that how you are good, because you're afraid of being punished? Is that why we should be good? If a little kid is going to run out in the street and the daddy grabs, don't run out in the street, and pulls the kid back. And the kid says, why, Daddy? Why shouldn't I run out in the street? Why? And the daddy says, because I said so. I'm your father. I'm your authority. And if you disobey my orders, you're offending me and my goodness and my authority. And it's a crime against me, and you shall not offend the Father. Is that their answer? What? Why should a kid not run out in the street?
Hit by the car.
Yeah. There's harm out there, harm out in the street. So I wrote this book, Mere Morality, to talk about how do we know, first of all, what is good and wrong, what is right and wrong, why are there good people and bad people, like Ivy said, and with or without a God, how do we know actually basically what moral decisions are? How do we know what morality is? And some of you probably get the title because of C.S. Lewis, right? His book, Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis, I think, was a great writer. I don't think he was a great thinker, but he was a great writer. And I really admire C.S. Lewis. And some of his other writings you can really enjoy reading, even though he was quite devout, quite the Christian. You can still enjoy what he wrote, and even disagreeing with him theologically, you can still appreciate the way he said it. His book, The Great Divorce, for example. Mere morality is considered by a lot to be, mere Christianity is considered by many to be a leading theological text of the 20th century. And I think, and I've written about C.S. Lewis in other places, my book, Mere Morality, is not a refutation of C.S. Lewis. In other places I've written about how he had this wonderful literary technique of analogies, and yet I think his mistake was he tended to argue from analogy instead of, I think analogies are useful, but you can't argue from an analogy. You can illustrate with an analogy, and analogies are great ways to illustrate, and we should all use them, and I use them a lot. But you can't take the analogy as if the analogy were the argument, and I think C.S. Lewis does that a lot in many of his writings. He makes this, and it's kind of deceptive because it's this great literary way of writing, and you think, wow, this is persuasive, and then you're sucked into this whole idea that this must mean that this is also true, therefore, because this is true. So that's bad thinking. It's good writing, but it's bad thinking. So in Mere Morality, I'm not attempting to refute C.S. Lewis. I'm attempting to do what he did in Mere Christianity for Christianity, trying to do that for the whole. Lewis thought that there was a core. There was a simple, basic core. Here's all these Christianities, and they all disagree with each other, all these theologies and all these denominations and all these fights, and people have even killed each other over silly things. I know a guy, he was a former Church of Christ minister, who said that his denomination had a split over whether or not the communion cup should have a handle. Really, they had a split over that. And if you think about it, you can't name a religion or a Christian denomination that's not a split off of something somewhere back in history, except maybe the Greek Orthodox. Maybe they can make a claim that they go way back to the original Greek. But in any event, no Protestant can claim they're not a split off of something back in history. So C.S. Lewis thought that he could take Christianity and strip off all of the non-essentials. Pull this away, like peeling back an onion to see what's down in the middle. We don't need this. What is it that all Christians basically agree on at its core, at the mere core, the mere Christianity? I don't know if he did a great job, and practically I don't know how many theologians think that he did, but in any event, he made the attempt. So I'm trying to do the same thing with the whole idea of morality. What is morality? What is it? What's essential to it and what's not? What is the core morality? C.S. Lewis would not have agreed with me that religion is one of those dispensable things that you can strip away from morality to find the core. He would not have agreed with that, but at least he would have appreciated the approach, because he used the same approach, and I'm using that same approach with morality. So I came up with a model. Nothing I say hasn't been said before, but I have a model that I've come up with called the Three Moral Minds, and in which, and I'm going to simplify really quick because we don't have a lot of time. Have you ever seen those cartoons where the character he's got a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and they're going back and forth, the head's going back and forth, what should I do, what should I do? Should I do what I want or should I do what I should, which is kind of it's a cartoon, right? It's kind of silly. I think we can use that kind of image and replace these silly supernatural symbols, absolutist symbols of right and wrong, with two other things. Just as a model, and this is an analogy, so it's not arguing from, but instead of an angel and a devil, we can put on this shoulder instinct, on this shoulder we can put law, and in the middle we have reason. Reason is the head in the middle. Reason is present judgment. And to kind of paraphrase a Bible verse, now abideth instinct, law, and reason, but the greatest of these is reason. Instinct is the result of the minds of our ancestors. Law is the result of the minds of the collective society that you live in, and if you're lucky enough to live in a society based on humanistic principles, most of the laws are going to be good. And of course, reason is what we use to decide whether or not an action itself or whether or not the instinct or the law are even good. Sometimes both of these should be disobeyed. Sometimes laws are bad and we should disobey them. Sometimes our instincts are wrong and we should disobey them. But speaking about instinct, I was flying to New York City in the fall of 1988 to be on the Phil Donahue Show. Some of you remember the Phil Donahue Show? It was a popular daytime talk show with millions of viewers all over the world. And he invited me and 4 others to be on a show about the afterlife. And so I knew there was going to be 4 others, including Jed Smock. He was going to be on the extreme hellfire. And then more and more moderate. And finally there was actually a Wiccan priestess named Sabrina something. And then me, the atheist, right? So what are our views on the afterlife? So I was flying to New York City and I was changing planes in Detroit, just like I did this morning. I changed planes in Detroit. The airport was a lot different back then, and this is way before 9/11. So that was the evening, and then the next morning was going to be the show. So I'm standing in line, going to get in the jet bridge to go to the flight to go to New York City. And I don't know what I was thinking about. Maybe I was thinking about the show, or what am I going to say about the afterlife? What do atheists think about the afterlife? There was another flight over here, really close, and there was a line of people on this other flight to get into another jet bridge. I don't know where they were going. And I must have noticed, I wasn't paying much attention, this young couple. They were standing here and they had a little baby in a baby carrier on top of a stack of luggage about this high off the ground. It must have been on a cart or something. And the father must have walked away or something. So I'm looking over here, and the corner of my eye sees that baby kick. And I watched myself do this. And I caught the edge of that thing as it was rolling toward the hard floor. And my fingertips caught it just in time. And then about a second later, the mother grabbed the other side, and we held that onto that. And I said, that was scary. It's like, whoa, that was scary. I didn't say thank God. Is that what you said? That's what Craig would have said. So I almost didn't want to let go. It was like this animal thing that just happened. And of course, I gave the baby back to the mother, obviously. And she picked it up and she held it then. And you should have seen the look she gave her husband. I don't know what. A few minutes later, they disappeared down the jet bridge, wherever they were going. And just before going in, she stopped and she turned around with the baby and she just looked at me for a second. No expression, nothing. She just kind of looked like, was he real? And I can imagine the story she later told this kid about the angel in the airport, you know. The angel who saved her life at the airport. So why did I do that? Why? It was instinctive, wasn't it? It was like, I didn't know those people. I might not have liked them. They might have been Republicans, I don't know. Or Democrats. I mean, strike that. We're not a political group, so strike that. We have Republicans in our group, so I need to tell you. Just you, okay. And it doesn't follow that if you're an atheist, you're necessarily a liberal. There are some very conservative atheists. So the table talk at our conventions is quite interesting. But anyway, that's a different topic. So why did I do that? It was almost like I was watching something else happen. It happened before I thought about it. When I was standing in line, was I thinking, how can I show the world that atheists are good people? Or how can I bring glory to God, or to Joseph Smith, or to Muhammad, or or was I thinking, now let me work through the consequences of my moral philosophy here to determine how I should act within a world of gray area? Was any of that going through my mind? It was like, it's just bang. What I did was not special. You would have done the same thing. I bet every person in this room would have immediately done exactly the same thing. Who wants to see a baby fall to a hard floor, right? I mean, that's just kind of a no-brainer, right? But why? Why did my body, it was like an animal biological thing that happened. It was, some people would call it pre-rational or pre-moral. It was like just a thing that you do without thinking. And I didn't even think of the risks involved. There could have been a risk. What if the floor was wet? What if I hurt somebody else? What if I had contributed to the injury of the falling baby? You know what I mean? What if any of that legally, what if, could I have got sued? Who knows? None of that happened. There wasn't time for that to happen. And when there's no time, that's when our instincts tend to have the highest value on average. Scientists have shown that instincts don't always work right, but on average they tend, it's more likely to, if you catch falling babies, you're more likely to pass on the genes to the future. So I think the instinct on my left shoulder here is something that I inherited from the minds of my ancestors, or not just ancestors, but predecessors, because some of them didn't survive, who made the decision. Obviously, those predecessors of ours who didn't care about falling babies were less likely to pass their genes on to you and me. So we have inherited those tendencies by natural selection. We got it because we got it, and the other ones didn't pass on. So we have these instincts for survival that are passed on to us. And in a sense, you can say that these were the results of decisions made by the minds of our predecessors. The ones who made bad decisions, on average, were not as likely to pass it on. So I think instinct is a very powerful piece of the moral puzzle. It's not the whole thing, obviously, and sometimes instinct is bad, especially when an instinct is firing in a new environment from which it evolved. And we live in a different environment now, so some of our instincts happened back then for good reasons in that environment, but now we live in different environments, and sometimes we do things instinctively without even knowing why or what sense does it even make, because we now live in a different kind of a more global world, less tribalistic world. So what do we mean by moral? What does the word moral actually mean when we say mere morality? My attempt was to bring morality down to a core. Not a big moral philosophy, not a big world philosophy, not a big happiness, just basically what do we mean at its core? What if we strip off everything else? And in mere morality, my 3 moral minds works out to what I call a C grade, a passing grade, or a driver's permit, or a basic morality beyond which we are all free to go and have an even more rich life. But what do we mean by actual morality itself? And I define morality as acting with the intention of minimizing harm. I think that's what morality is. And I think almost every believer will tell you that too. If you were to take all the religions of the world like it's a big smorgasbord and judge them, what are the good ones and what are the bad ones? How would you judge them? However you judge them, you're using a criteria that's above and beyond the religions themselves to judge those religions. And what is the principle we use? I think the principle we use is the harm principle. And of course, I'm not the first to say this. Many philosophers and moral philosophers have said this. I think morality basically means acting with the intention of minimizing actual harm in the real world. That's what we mean. That's how I reach to catch that baby. Well, why would I catch it? Because there's harm about to happen. Why do you keep the toddler from running out in the street? Because there's harm that could happen. And whatever harm is, harm can be 1,000 different things. You could make a long list. Hunger and thirst and the elements and disease and natural disasters and maybe inequality and oppression and war, and you make a list of things that are harmful to us. Whatever it is, it's natural. Harm is a natural thing. Harm is not offending the ego of the Father because you haven't respected my holiness. Harm is a real natural thing. So, and its avoidance, therefore, is a natural exercise. So that's where reason comes in. Reason, then, if you have time, I didn't have time with the baby, but if you do have time to evaluate possible actions that you want to take, then look at the actions and look at the potential consequences of those actions, 2 or more actions, and then try to your best of your knowledge to evaluate what's the actual harm that results. Sometimes harm results from both of them. And so on the front of my book I have a compass. And I think the 3 moral minds is like a compass. A compass is very useful, but if you have a compass doesn't tell you where to go, does it? It doesn't even tell you where you are. What does a compass do? It just points to north. You may not even want to go north. A compass just helps to orient you. It doesn't tell you how to live your life. I think morality can be boiled down to a simple compass, basically, of that needle that's pointing north. We can redefine that needle that's pointing north as minimal harm, less harm, or no harm. We want to get to a world that has less violence, less harm, less overall threat to our survival. Sam Harris, in his book, The Moral Landscape, defines it as the well-being of sentient creatures. But whenever he unpacks the word well-being, he uses terms that are harmful. In other words, we want to avoid harm to our well-being. How can you be well if you're harmed, basically? So if you're going through life, the terrain or the ocean can be very difficult to navigate, and you got this compass. Sometimes if you're going to go north, depending on the terrain, sometimes you have to go east and west a while, don't you, to get to go north. We were talking about that today, about maps and stuff. Sometimes you even have to go south for a while if you want to go north, if that's your intention. Like, I think we would all agree, we shouldn't take a needle and jab it into a baby. The baby's going to cry and scream and it's going to hurt, right? Unless that baby needs a life-saving injection, then you will take a needle and you will jab it into a baby and the baby will cry. You're going south for a little while. Why? Because your overall intention is to go north, away from harm. Amputating a limb is a horrible, tragic thing to do, but sometimes it's the action you have to take in order to minimize overall harm in the world. So the only way to do that is with reason, and reason can take the harm principle and evaluate consequences. So therefore, this is consequentialist. Some people argue that my book is utilitarian, and I disagree. Obviously, Jeremy Bentham and the utilitarians had a great idea. The most happiness for the greatest number, greatest happiness for the greatest number. That's a great idea, but I don't know if I'm capable of making such a grand calculation. What is the greatest happiness for the great? How can I do that? That seems like more of a job for governments, and even governments have trouble with that. And besides that, I don't think it's my moral duty to make you happy. I don't think it's my job morally, for mere morality. Of course, after we determine mere morality, we can all choose to go beyond if we want to. But I think it is my moral responsibility to try to end up with a world with the least amount of harm in it at the beginning, at the C-grade passing level, driver's permit level of what morality means. So I think a person can be moral who sits at home and does nothing. I don't think there's a charity imperative. I don't think there's a compassion imperative. I don't think we all have to do that. Because when people are philanthropic, when people do go beyond and sacrifice and give, we praise them, right? We praise the philanthropists and people who do good. Well, if you had to do it, it wouldn't be praiseworthy. It's praiseworthy because you don't have to do it, and yet you choose to do it. Some of you in this room, like Ivy said, there's good people and there's evil, and that's just the way the world works. Some of you in this room are more naturally empathetic and altruistic and compassionate and giving, and you want to enrich your life through that. And others of you maybe don't care as much. I still think those of you who don't can still be considered moral people if you are using this compass and trying to make sure you're not creating unnecessary harm in the real world. We don't have a lot of time, but the other shoulder is law. And the law is not your own mind. The law is a result of the collective mind of the society that we live in. And sometimes laws are good. When I'm driving on the highway, I tend to drive the speed limit. And if you can't drive the speed limit, then you haven't really planned your trip very well, because you should plan it to get where you're going. Sometimes we should break the speed limit, though. If there's a choking baby in the back seat, I'm going to speed. I'm going to break that law and suffer the consequences because of the overall harm that we're thinking about here. Jaywalking is usually a bad idea, but sometimes we should jaywalk. Sometimes there are reasons why you need to take the law and to change it so that you can make at least a moral case. Tell it to the judge maybe, or tell it to the police officer, but you can still make a moral case that what you're doing is aiming at lessening overall harm in the real world. So I won't talk too much about law. That's a big topic. But in the middle of the book, we'll have time for questions in a minute. Is that okay? I'm sorry. In the middle of the book, I have a section on, I call it the God book. Now, you've heard it called the good book. Hey, my shoes come untied. I call it the God book because you won't find the word morality in the Bible. You don't find the word ethics in the Bible. The Bible is not concerned with human-to-human moral behavior. It really isn't. There are a few passages here and there, and I used to preach a few of them. In my estimation, maybe 5% or less of the Bible is concerned with human-to-human moral behavior, what you and I would call morality. So how do we know what the Bible says is good or bad? How do we know if the Bible is our moral guide, where do we find it? So I went through the entire Bible and looked up the words wicked and evil. Wicked, and used all through the entire Bible. They're used about 1,000 times, depending on which English translation you use. I wanted to see, what do wicked and evil mean? What are they actually talking about when they use those words in the Bible? What do you think wicked and evil mean?
Harm to others.
Yeah, harm to others, okay. Who else has an idea? What do you think wicked?
Obedience to God.
Yeah, that's closer to it.
Disobedience to people who speak for God.
Okay. So I was surprised. There are a few places where the words wicked and evil are connected to human behavior to other humans. There's a drunken son who's a glutton, and that's called evil, right? So there's something. And then there's a few places where you don't take care of the widows or the orphans. There are a few places where you will find wicked and evil connected with human behavior. But most of the time, at least more than 90% of the time, it has nothing to do with that at all. You know what the biggest evil is in the Bible, numerically? The word evil is connected to something in the Bible more than anything else. What do you think it is?
Not believing.
Not believing? Not believing?
Satan.
No, not Satan. Who said it? What? Idolatry. That's the answer. Idolatry is the big evil in the Bible, which means what? Worshipping some other god besides me. I'm the big God. And even the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God. You should have no other gods before me. And you should not make any idols. And if you read my book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, you see this God of the Bible is really like a controlling, abusive husband. He even calls the Israelites his wife, his bride. And he calls them his husband in one place, who says, you love me and I love you, and you don't look at any other man. And if you ever look sideways at any other man or any other group, I'm going to tear your hair out and burn your eyes and spread cow poop on your face. And I'm not making this up. It's in the Bible. All this stuff. The God of the Bible is so insecure that if anybody looks at another God or idol or worship somebody other than him, he even calls himself jealous. In the actual Ten Commandments, he says, my name is jealous. I'm a jealous God. What do you think is the second most common evil, wicked in the Bible?
Homosexuality.
No, that's very rare. That comes up, but it's very rare. And they use the word abomination in those verses.
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy? No, I mean blasphemy is there, but it's not a biggie. Yeah.
Not keeping the law.
Well, you're getting closer with that one.
Donating enough money.
The second one is the Sabbath. Not worshiping on the Sabbath. That's a biggie all through the Bible. What do you think is the third one? In third place for evil and wicked in the Bible.
Killing? No.
Not killing. No, God tells people to kill all the time. So. Not killing. Well, actually, there's a good story about that. The Saul. You know, Saul used to be king, and Saul lost his kingship. You know why? Because he failed to complete a complete genocide. He left a few animals alive. That's why the Jews have a Star of David today rather than a Star of Saul. Saul committed a complete genocide, but he failed to please God because he left a couple of animals alive. Really. And that was it. God commanded this total killing. But the number 3, this surprised me, and I used to preach a lot. The number 3 wicked evil in the Bible is intermarriage. Interracial or interreligious marriage. It's a big deal in the Old Testament. The prophet Ezra and a whole bunch of them talked about that. The marriage, if you marry somebody from outside the tribe, and you know why that was wrong? It was the same thing as idolatry. Because your spouse is going to tempt you to go to the wrong God, to the wrong religion. And it says that very explicitly. And there was a priest in the Bible, Phinehas, who was the grandson of Aaron, the high priest. And God had told the Israelites, don't intermarry with those Midianites. Don't you dare do that. And the Midianites were south of the border. And Midianites actually traced back to Abraham too. But the Midianites, you know why they weren't supposed to intermarry with the Midianites? He says,
Little things have handles on their cups.
yeah, how did you know? Well, and it's very explicit. It's because they worshipped another god. They worshipped Baal Peor. So if anybody married one of them, you would be tempted to stray away from your marriage to God. So it's all this jealousy thing. So there was an Israelite who did marry with a Midianite woman, brought her into his tent. Cosbi and Zimri were their name. And Phinehas went into their tent with a sword, and he stabbed them both, and he killed them. What do you think happened to Phinehas after he committed this brutal hate crime of interracial or interreligious marriage?
Promotion.
He was praised. God even said to him, you have kept the people pure, the master race is pure, you haven't bred outside, you are rewarded with a perpetual priesthood. Today that would be a horrible hate crime by the highest degree. So the Bible is not a good moral guide. The Bible it has very little in it that we would say would be a guide for how to live our lives. So I'll just summarize really quickly. I think mere morality, the basic core morality, above and beyond which we're all free to go at our own decisions, is trying to live a life with the intention of minimizing overall harm in the real world. And if you are intending that, even if you fail, if you're intending that, you can be called a moral person. And you can do that without a God, without a religion, without any spiritual principles, but with just a love for our species and a love for who we are as a human race. So we should take some questions, or do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we-